Welcome. Ivan would say morning, morning. So morning, everyone. We are, yes, we've mentioned that we're missing Ivan. He's taking a well-deserved break. And so that leaves me to manage on all the proceedings, and we'll see how well it goes. So thank you all for being here. Today we launch into, well, just continuing our discussion. We had this discussion around corruption, and then obviously the flip side of that is ethics. And we had a really good discussion looking at all different facets of ethics yesterday. And you know, it's all very well to put it out there as, you know, let's talk about ethics as if it is somebody else's problem or something that isn't related to us personally. And so instead today, we're going to look at how does it relate to me? And the point that I want to make, and I'm going to read something that I've sort of had at the back of my mind since we started this discussion. But the point that I want to make is that we are fooling ourselves if we think that we will always remain on the straight and narrow unless we purpose to do that. And I mean straight and narrow in terms of our own, the ethical principles that we believe in and that we hold true to, and that any one of us at any time can stray off the path, and therefore it is something that we need to be vigilant in terms of our remaining true to our own ethical principles. And so what I want to read is, and it is sad, it's the suicide note of one of the Enron executives. His name is John Baxter. He was basically to the CEO, and a few months before Enron, so for those of you who don't know, I'm pretty sure most of you know, Enron was a huge accounting firm that was collapsed in a heap because of fraud and corruption and all of those things. It was an enormous company in the 80s that just imploded because of poor ethics, bad practicing, and they were all brought to book. And this guy, John Baxter, sold $30 million worth of his shares a few months before Enron declared bankruptcy. He then turned state witness, and it was during the time of the trial that he committed suicide. And he wrote this in his suicide note. He writes it to his wife, Carol. "I'm so sorry for this. I feel I just can't go on. I have always tried to do the right thing, but where there was once great pride, now it's gone." And it goes on. But I always think about that. I've always tried to do the right thing, but where there was great pride, now it's gone. And I just imagine this man with all the best intentions, with this wonderful family, and that inch by inch, he compromised his own stance and beliefs and justified it step after step until he found himself in a place that he didn't even recognize himself anymore. And that's why I say, I think he's not the only person to have ever done that. So that's really by way of saying, how do we remain a lot in the path that is right for us without compromising our own values and beliefs? So by way of introduction, I hand it over to Trevor Carty. Would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a hell of a sad thing when you get to a stage where the only solution is to kill yourself. Some of our greatest testimonies are that we have not yet killed ourselves and that we are still here. And before every great fall comes that great pride. So pride is a proper indicator that there is something on the horizon, because pride is not something you should be too overly jealous of as a character reference. In my 54 years, I've learned to try and substitute my pride, which has had many falls, with humility, because it starts putting you back on the right track again. But it's only after you've fallen that you get the opportunity to rise again. While you're stuck in that pride story and that dilemma of how you handling your own activity and actions, it's so close to you that you really you can't separate it from yourself. So you actually need to have a hard fall. It's just hopefully a hard fall that's not at the end of a rope or the end of a gun or the end of a knife or the end of a pill bottle, because it all comes back to this beautiful, lovely, long word called forgiveness. And you got to start by saying, I got to forgive myself for all my own wrongdoings. And that's the toughest one in the book. Toughest one is we think it's tough to forgive someone else. I mean, Trevor Nell canceled drinks with me. I can forgive him for that, but not going for the drink myself, I can't forgive myself for that. But so yeah, it's just, I think, the foundation of all of this is humility and service. And if you can be a humble servant, oh wow, wouldn't that just be a delightful dream to execute on? So how we get to humble servant, not convinced, but I do know that pride comes before the fall, and you have to fall before you can learn to become anything near a humble servant. So forgive me my trespasses, as they forgive me that I trespassed against for today. Have a lovely weekend all. Enjoy the bush, Ivan.
Thanks, Trevor. Thanks, Trevor. Jasper, what do you think?
I'm happy you started with my pastor friend there, Trevor Carty. He put us on track. You know, I think the whole thing of being sucked into corruption, and I mean, it was a very apt story that you shared there. That and even the great man in the Bible, Apostle Paul, writing one of his writings, relieve me from this wretched body, because the good that I intend to do I don't, and the bad that I don't intend to do I do. So it's almost a trait of human nature that we can so easily get seducted into things that start off not too bad. And I was mentioning it in one of the previous sessions of call it soft corruption versus hard corruption. So that soft corruption is going out for lunch and stuff like that, and it's okay. But when do you step over that line? Was it when you accepted the weekend to the golf tournament? But that's also okay. But when was that next step? And it's only almost in hindsight that you can see, that you can admit to yourself. And I think the big thing that Trevor alluded to is you know. It's almost an internal moral compass, you know. You know when you have been seduced, and that you have, up till that point, you were strong on, I follow the rules, and you can buy me lunch as much as you want, but you still have to follow the system. But then in hindsight, long down the road, you'll realize that was that one event where you started to cut some corners, and you were sucked into this whole thing. So I almost wanted to say, you know, I wrote down that just God's grace. So many times, you know, when I see and hear of situations, I can almost say, therefore, but for the grace of God, am I. Because I have been exposed to many similar sort of challenges, and I could easily have been one of the persons that was referred to. But I do think one can, if you are fortunate to grow up and operate and work in the right environment, and you make yourself voluntarily, let's say you're in a business situation, then make yourself voluntarily accountable to your business partners. But also, if you set up a new entity, and I know if you're an inherently good person and you don't think of all the bad and evil that can happen in organization, but I'm just thinking through the process that we had to go through when we set up the constitution of the Generational Inheritance Group as a bank. And at the time, you know, I only had enthusiastic, like-minded thinkers around me that bought into the whole vision. But we had to start thinking to say, but what if a person is not like us, or this kind of situation occurs? So you almost had to dig deep to try and think of how would you handle such a situation. So I think you can protect yourself in large organizations through a good constitution, which put the rules down and then regularly communicate it. But I think it's a daily journey, and you know, stay close to your Creator who knows your purpose in life, because all those things are distractions from your real purpose. And I think the people who often fall in the traps are people who have lost their purpose and then they get seduced into all sorts of things. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasper. Yeah, I think that really helps to kind of just see exactly, following on from Trevor's, this idea of having a true picture of yourself that includes a hefty dose of humility. Cecile, are you around to be able to share your thoughts?
Yes, I'm here. Sure, it is such an interesting topic. When you were reading that thing about the Ultron guy, I was just thinking of my ultimate friend, hero, whatever, Hansie Cronje. That was such a good person. I knew him, I knew his family. We grew up together. It was just, it seems like money is, and this inherent, I don't know, inherent, or it's inherent, or is it learned, greed type of attitude that will corrupt a good person. So that was just the most shocking thing when the whole Hansie thing broke, because I just said it's not possible, it can't be. Yeah, so luckily, well, it's great that you say that no one is uncorruptible, and I actually believe that with you as well. So one has to guard against little bite-sized things that happen that that can suck you into greed and corruption, and just break your whole ethical being down. So I still try, and I do every day. I do my little gratifications every day for the small things in life. And as we get older, the smaller things are becoming so much more important, to stay true to your ethics, to just be with your family, be in nature, be quiet, not to chase after worldly things, because it's the chase after worldly things and the keeping up with the Joneses that will often trip us up. So my husband laughs when I say that, but I still believe my motto in life is I want to live with voluntary simplicity, because there's so much depth and wealth in voluntary simplicity that it will guard you a little bit against all the things that you want to have. It's rather experience the experiences than things to have. Yeah, so I love the conversation, so keep on going.
Thanks, Cecile. Yes, it's funny, I just put Hansi's name in the chat as an example of somebody who had great and wonderful intentions and was such a wonderful role model for so many. And again, I'm pretty sure it was just this slow decisions that you compromise your own stance. And also, I also put in there that the pressure, somehow it's the pressure and the demands of being in the public eye has an effect that perhaps we who don't experience that underestimate. Donovan, what do you think?
Morning, everyone. Yeah, I was just thinking of my own experience in construction, whereby I had to certify the work done by the contractors, approved payments, etc. So there were always temptations. So the way I see it, it's very difficult, but it's possible to stay on the right path. There'll always be temptations. There'll always be opportunities, but you just need to be focused. I think to be focused is the key. I think that's how I managed to survive so far. Thank you.
As always, Donovan, you say just the right thing in just the right amount of words. So succinct. Yeah, difficult but possible, and stay focused. Caroline, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I agree with what's been said so far, that we are all potentially corruptible, that there but for the grace of God go I, and that it is a question of humility and of realizing that we are not infallible, and that we need to keep taking a check, and basically to so that you can sleep well at night, that you can live with yourself, basically. But I think, when you're on a roll and you're getting more famous and getting more rich and whatever, then it obviously is somehow those things overtake, and it's hard to keep that daily check. I love what Cecile said about voluntary simplicity. I mean, I think that's a lovely idea, and that it is those temptations maybe that are a lot of the problems. I also just wanted to take issue with what Ed said yesterday. Not, and maybe this is a bit off the track, but again, I know that he didn't necessarily say it as what he believed, but the idea that to stick to your principles, where he cited his friend who was loyal to the nth degree, and the idea that I think that idea has caused a lot of problems in the world. Just, you think of the mafia, but then you also think of, being loyal to your family, no matter what, being loyal to your tribe, no matter what, being loyal to, your race, your, even, you know, whether you're doing, it's sort of putting that loyalty above everything else. I think that's what's caused a lot of problems in the world. And then, you know, you get the kind of factionalism in politics that we stick together no matter what. And even the idea that you put sort of the unity of the ANC above the good of the country. So, yeah, I think it sounds commendable to be, I mean, loyalty to friends is commendable, but yeah, I think there are other ethics that are actually more important. Okay, that's me.
We like nothing better than a little disagreement. And we pride ourselves on not being a groupthink group. So thanks, Caroline. And so Edward, we turn to you. You have been named, and but please say what you want to say.
I've got a bit of defending to do here. I think Caroline is absolutely right. I wasn't holding it up as a good example. I was almost trying to illustrate the difference, I think, between ethics and morals. Because, you know, ethics, I think, is sticking to a code. And it's not necessarily doing the right thing, it's sticking to a code. So that's the point I was trying to get across there. Because obviously my friend's code didn't agree with mine. I don't agree with stealing things, and I don't agree with hurting people, but that was that. So yeah, I hope you appreciate that difference. And I do agree, yes, you know, very often, you know, the boys club, sticking to a code, belonging to a political party, you can get yourself in situations where you don't want to be. The other thing I can defend myself on is on accountants, because Enron was not an accounting firm. It was an energy supplier, a commodity trader, and a service company. Absolutely nothing to do with accounting.
So Edward, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there to say I knew I had got it wrong, and I was counting on you to correct me. So thank you so much.
Yeah. But having said that, I do think the 4 big accounting firms have got a lot to answer for. Back to the subject, the straight and narrow, that's what you described it as, Lee, following a path, keeping to the straight and narrow. And I think it's very easy to stick to the straight and narrow when it's a well-defined path, and especially when it's fenced off. If you're down an alley, for example, you can't go anywhere else. And for me, being a vegan is very, very easy, because it's either meat or it's not meat. It's a plant or it's not a plant. So that's very easy for me to be a vegan. It's much harder for me to be a good environmentalist, because the issues there are far more complex. So I think it's the same with anything. If you are going to be involved in complex stuff, you have to make your own decisions, because there is no defined path. And there it becomes much more complicated. And how do you know when you've strayed? Because there's no way of telling when you've strayed, because, you know, if you're wandering across a moor, it all looks the same. And then Jasper said something interesting about good people not necessarily recognizing evil in a company or whatever. And in the back of my mind, I remember a matrix. I don't know why consultants always have matrices, don't they? They're always like 4 boxes. And this one had an owl, a fox, a lamb, and a donkey, I think, to describe different types of people. And the owl were the wise ones and stuff like that. And the lambs were the ones that got slaughtered, and the foxes were the ones doing the thing. And it was like saying that if you are a sort of naive, good person, you need to find someone who's a little bit savvy to buddy up with, so you can use his savviness to try and navigate your way through the jungle. I hope that makes sense. Bit of a ramble. And if anyone knows that matrix, I'd love to know it, because I can't remember it properly. So that's my contribution. If it's a nice path, and actually the easiest path to stick to, and I ran a race in South Africa called the Num Num Challenge. I forget where it was. It goes over a few hiking trails, and one part of the route goes along a cliff edge. It was really easy not to stray off that path, because if you did, you died. I think it was near Nelspruit? It was near there somewhere. Fantastic, fantastic race, brilliant race. I think it was the hardest trail race I've ever done. And it was quite, I think it was about 50K or something, but really tough. Yeah, so if the consequences of falling off your path are very severe, you're going to stick to it. That's me finished.
Thanks, Edward. I think that's really helpful to think about this path, and when it's clearly defined and when the consequences are clear, we're more likely to stay on it. I think where some of the self-deception happens is where we think we're not going to be caught. And so we're not realistic about the consequences. So I think sometimes that catches us off guard. Mpumelelo, you are nodding wisely. So this means that it is your turn to tell us your wonderful thoughts.
Yeah, good morning to everyone again. I guess the question was, how do you make sure you stick to your ethics, or should we say morals or values? A very soul-searching question. I think yesterday when I was thinking about it, a lot of soul-searching was happening. But I'll then speak from experience as to what are the things I would do to make sure that I stick to my value system, to what I believe is right. The first thing is I've always made sure when I get into an environment that I stake my claim. So I say what my values are from the word. What I've found happens when you do that, and I'll give an example shortly, is that firstly, you've already raised and put a standard by which people know how to act and behave around you. But secondly, people start to police you as well themselves, because you've put it out there and you've made it clear. I worked in advertising. Now you can go into your imagination to think about what the advertising environment is like. Swearing was second nature. Things that you ordinarily wouldn't see people were done as if that's what makes you a great creative or an advertising person. And because I had put it up front when I started out to say, this is me, this is what I believe in, this is how I do things, there was a lot of excluding me when it comes to stuff. There was a lot of, don't call that one, don't tell that one. And I found that having done that, it made sure that it keeps me away from the potential of doing something that is not right. That strategy, I call it the avoidance strategy. It's what I call a do not lead us into temptation. What I mean by that is doing the things that you make sure will in the first place not put you in a bad position. It's not always the case that you will be able to avoid. I'm very much aware of that. But that's a first strategy I will put in place. I call it an avoidance, by making sure when I get in an environment, I say what my values and my systems are. It makes me to keep myself, to police myself, people to police me, but at the same time as well, how people should behave around me. It was very difficult in advertising for anyone to come to me and say, can you bribe for this and that? Because that was already put up front and people were like, no, not that one, don't go to him. The second one that I've used a lot in my own life to try and keep away from trouble or doing wrong is I've always had this thought that the cost of an unethical behavior is much higher than the momentary gain that a person gets at that time. Because I think that's the temptation mostly. It's the immediate gain that you will get. And the immediate gain becomes so prominent and so strong that the cost becomes diminished. And all of a sudden you don't see it. Allow me to go this way. Eve eating in the Garden of Eden, to her, the gain was the wisdom and being like God. But the cost was later on the son killing the other son, and so much more, and the loss of the garden and the loss of the land. So the cost was much higher, but at that moment, it seemed so small. So I always say this to myself: anything that I will do now, I may not see the complete cost, but the cost will be higher than what I am thinking I'm gaining at this moment. And I think that has helped me a lot to say, look, it may look very good. It may look very tempting, but the cost may just be too much. That's the second one. The third and the last one, which probably is difficult and maybe I haven't experienced it as much, is when the cost is to your life, I think, or to your livelihood, if I may put it like that. Take a person who has to choose whether they must leave a job because of an unethical behavior and have to then lose a paycheck, and then not be able to pay a car, not being able to pay a house. That cost, I have to admit, I haven't gone through that extreme one. I always wonder, but always believe that I should in good times build the strength to be able to withstand that. And speaking about that one as well, people like your Nelson Mandela's, your Martin Luther's, people who their belief in doing right cost them so much. That's where I was asking myself and soul searching to say, that high level of cost for doing what is right, would you be able to stick to your, I don't necessarily have an answer yet to that one.
Yeah, and Pumelela, I love the way that you flipped that question, you know, our ethical, staying on our ethical path is measuring the costs, but, you know, are we prepared to count the cost of doing what's right, which can sometimes cost us very dearly. And we have these incredible examples in our living history that demonstrate that. So Trevor, that comes back to you now. What do you want to say?
Well, I've been around the block once or twice and kicked the block under the bed a couple of times. I think I'm going to have to short circuit the early part of my life prior to getting married. There was, I think something in my life, and I don't know what it is, just turned me into an independent when I was very young. And I always, you know what, I can recall guys offering me drugs on the way from the beach. I must have been about 12 or 13. And I told them to stuff off in no uncertain terms, and they were big boys. And when I looked back at it, it was actually the drug dealer with his team who were trying to recruit me because they saw me walking from the beach every now and then. And I realized that what I was doing there was actually taking on the Durban Mafia at that particular time. So as my heart was pounding, I was waiting for them to attack me. A couple of times I had been followed, and we had some interesting, look, I knew how to actually shape a baseball bat and a knobkerrie and those sort of things in those days. So it was very interesting growing up. And then as I started getting into developing little business operations, clearly people turned around and said, hey, what you're doing here is fantastic. What we can do is take this through the roof. This is the easy way to do it. And right from those early days, stuff off became the key phrase in my vocab. And then I got involved in the listings games, and it just became bigger and bigger. And I saw that all of these things, 99.99% of the companies on the JSE, etc., all full of tripe. Anyone who actually turns around and says, listen, I'm the best thing since peanut butter with ethics, and that the higher you get up into the system, the less the ethics. Now, when Lee turns around and says it costs you a fortune, let me tell you, you don't know how much turning around to people and telling them to get stuffed has cost me in a big way. But as you were all talking, I was thinking, well, why was I doing this? And I think it was, I wrote it down there. I recognized very early on that what is happening in the society is that people want to have control over you. And the best way for them to have control over you is to get you to do the things, the naughty things that they want to do. And stealing big money, the moment they can get you to do that or to take drugs, and talking about drugs, as Mpumelelo was talking his third point, I think we all have addictive personalities. So you get hooked on sugar, you get hooked on eating, you get hooked on all of these things. And those are the temptations. The moment that you start putting your fingers into the cookie jar and other people are watching and you're operating in a group, you either have to break away and become a whistleblower and look at this guy in VBS who's now got 7 years there. I don't think it's enough. He should have got 15 to 20 years. But people are all around just waiting for you to show your weakness so that they can have power and control over you. And if I go back to what is it that I considered most important in my life, I wanted my family to be safe. I wanted a roof over my head. I wanted, which I was fortunate enough from nowhere, I was able to actually get this roof over my head in 1991 and effectively retire back then. And then to resist all the offers that were being made to me to make millions, but not just millions, in the 500 million, 600 millions in those days, and having to tell those people to stuff off. And if I go back and count, 6 to 7 of them have enjoyed the orange suits. All of them that I've had to turn around and say, I don't just say no, I actually say for them to actually come to me and put this temptation in front of me deserves the biggest smack ever, but that's just been my personality. So, and I'll give you their names at a later stage. They're all sitting around. They're languishing in prison. So who's laughing now? But it cost hundreds of millions.
Thanks, Trevor. I mean, that's really powerful stories, isn't it? When you think about from when you were a child all the way through, and then, as you say, as you grow and you get closer and closer to these positions and levels, the temptations are greater. And I just also think that picture of people want to draw you in. It goes back to what Caroline was saying about loyalty. Is that if you can get somebody to be loyal, and there's nothing better than getting somebody to do something bad on your behalf or with you, to buy your loyalty. And yeah, so great example. So where does that leave us for Monday? I don't know if it's entirely on track with this discussion, but all I've been thinking about, and because we've been talking maybe about costs and consequences and decisions, and what are my intentions versus what I'm actually doing, it reminds me of a TED talk that I actually posted on our social media, the Wisdom social media platforms last week. It's a Dutch lady, I think her name is it's escaping me now, but the talk is about how to bridge the gap between planning and doing. And she uses the analogy of our current selves and our future selves, and that our current self makes a decision that our future self has to live with. But when our future self is in the place of having to live with that decision, that future self is not happy, because either the decision that the current self made prior was unrealistic and you don't want to live with it anymore, or the future self is in a completely different context that the current self previously could not have anticipated. And I thought that was just quite an interesting way of thinking about how then do we make decisions about who we want to be, what our goals are, when we are constantly moving between our current self and our future self, with our future self then becoming our current self. And I don't know if I'm confusing things even more, but the point of what I'm trying to say is, how do we bridge that gap between my planning? And it doesn't just have to be about ethics. It could be about your goals. It could be about what you want to achieve. It could be about saving in your old age, whatever it is so how do we bridge that gap? And everybody has to face it. Everybody has to deal with this gap between what I plan, what I intend, and what I actually do. And so let's talk about that on Monday. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the weekend.